Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Scarif Live. Let's pop out this graphic here. Thank you guys for being in the chat. Hey, there we are. How's everybody doing? Like I was saying, we have a very special edition of Scarif Live here this August 25th. I am Ro from the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast, and across the stars from me is Mr. Brad, the butt to my scuttle. Brad, how's it going, man?
It's more dismal than Camino here. It's been raining harder than Camino for the last 3 weeks, I think, and I've had enough. But who we got coming on tonight kind of brings some sunshine, some Scarif sun.
Oh,
To that
definitely.
Camino sky.
There is definitely going to be some Scarif sun here today, and I was telling you before we came on the air, we this is probably like the first time I'm getting like real butterflies. I'm real nervous about this one. Obviously, being a collector of Star Wars myself, being able to talk to Steve is going to be an amazing treat for me. Brad, do you remember your very first Star Wars collectible?
First
Well,
collectible. Well, what's the definition of a collectible? Are we going to get into that? My first toy.
yeah, your first toy. I mean,
I could
obviously
tell
we
you,
were kids when the movie came
yeah,
out. So, what was your first Star Wars collectible?
the one that I wish that I had hung on to was my Ewok village from
Uh,
Return of the. I had that, and then I got a reproduction years later, which was probably nicer, actually, to tell you the truth, than the
sure.
original. But that between that and the Rancor, as a kid, those are probably my favorites, and I wish I had hung on to so many more things from when I was a kid.
And that was the reissued. Before that, it was the Sherwood Forest Robin Hood
Oh, was it
action
really?
playset. Yes, and we'll confirm that with Steve. I'm sure he's got the all the details on that. But yeah, I mean,
You just
obviously all
killed my
these
dreams
toys
a
were.
little bit there.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So my first collectible, I have it right here. It's one of the original stormtroopers, and as you can see, it was been played with. I burnt
As it should be.
I burnt his elbow because I wanted him to hold the gun like this instead of like that. So I was a mischievous little kid, and it's got some carbon scoring on his feet.
Yeah, I was gonna say
He
it's the perfect score.
he had quite an adventure. Along with this original stormtrooper, I also had Princess Leia. So I was able to recreate many fun scenes of the captive princess. But I digress. Brad, are you going to ask me who we're going to be talking to this evening? I already said his
I,
name, but
Steve, somebody who are we talking to?
I'm glad you asked. So we've been very excited, obviously, for this show. Many weeks in the planning, and if you're a fan of rooms and rooms and more rooms of Star Wars collectibles, then you've got to stick around for this. Guys in the chat, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to play a quick little sizzle reel and then come back and we will start talking to Mr. Steve Sansweet. Stand by, everybody. Excellent. Excellent. So let's bring in Mr. Steve Sansweet from Rancho Obi Wan, who will grace the sunny skies with Scarif. Steve, how's it going?
It's gone great, guys. Thank you for inviting me along. I didn't realize until looking at that little sizzle reel that I could move so quickly, but it's amazing.
It's amazing what a little post production can do.
A little
Definitely.
post-production. Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
And
But
that 5 seconds, I think, is my entire bucket list right there in that in that sizzle
right.
reel.
And I was telling Brad, we've been collecting Star Wars ourselves for quite a long time. As you can see, behind us, we've got quite an array, but obviously nothing compared to the collection that you have curated throughout the years. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Scare Scuttlebutt podcast. I was mentioning that, I'm getting a little nervous. It's a little kind of like a little starstruck here. But thank you, Steve, for joining us.
I'm just a fellow fan. That's all.
That is awesome. So I wanted to ask, we've kind of grown up together with this franchise, seeing people, collect things and the films and everything from expanded universe to sequel trilogy, and there's a lot of rich content that the maker has created through the action figures and the stories and the comic books. Tell us a little bit about your history with Star Wars and the fandom and the franchise, and perhaps maybe your first appearance when you started to realize that your collection was a little bit more than just, a guy hoarding toys.
Well, I've been a collector all my life, so that goes way back into the 1950s when I was just a kid, and because I'm one of those old dudes, as you can see by the
We all
gray,
got it.
yeah, yes. So,
Which I feel
but I collected everything from end of bread loaf wrappers to little ice cream cups, and they used to have movie star pictures on the inside, baseball cards, comic books. I had some, comic books even that people had. My brother, who was older than me, had some comic books from the 40s. If I had only kept some of those in good condition. So, yeah, nice stuff. So I loved science fiction growing up. A neighbor, a friend of my parents, was one of the early members of the science fiction book club, and he used to give me books that he had finished reading. So I read a lot of science fiction, and there were a lot of picture books. And this was the dawn of the space age. I loved the real world stuff. And so Star Wars came along. Well, actually, it was before Star Wars. I was, at that point, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal in Los Angeles. And I convinced the paper that I wanted to write a story about antique toys. And at that point, antique toys meant something that was before 1900, usually. The old die-cast cars and metal banks and wind-up tin toys from France and Germany. And I was at one of my interviews, and the gentleman said, well, you want to know, we talked about his collection. I think he had the big cars and everything. And he said, you want to know what the next hot thing is going to be? And then brought out a box of plastic robots. And I can remember there was a robot called Robert the Robot, and it was red and yellow and blue plastic, and it had a $2.98 price tag on it, and the name of the store, the Hollywood Toy Shop. So when I finished the interview, I sped directly over to the Hollywood Toy Shop, bought 9 different robots that they had on the shelves, bought all the batteries for them, brought them home, put the batteries in, and had them all walk across the kitchen floor. Scared my dog half to death, but I was hooked on that. So I started collecting old Japanese tin toys and all space-oriented kinds of stuff. And then Star Wars came out. And Star Wars just blew me away. It was, I had heard something about it. There was a screening for financial journalists in Los Angeles on the back lot of 20th Century Fox a week and a half before Star Wars opened. And so I went there, and just like almost everybody else in the audience, when the Star Destroyer goes overhead, we all involuntarily looked up and then sort of had to laugh to ourselves, because obviously there wasn't a Star Destroyer on the ceiling. But I can just remember leaving the screening and going up to the public relations guy who had invited us all and said, could I have my ticket back? So that was one of my early collectibles, although not the first Star Wars collectible.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, even now, I still save my tickets, and I go out with friends, and we make an event of it. Obviously, it's close and dear to every fandom's heart. fan's heart, and that's really cool. So let me ask you, Steve, why is it that people collect? I talked with one of our friends over at the Holo Chronicles podcast, and we were discussing really the notion of collecting. You know, it's this thing where we take this piece of plastic and we remember, we have fond memories that are related to this. What is it that makes people collect and enjoy it?
Well, I think that's the secret. It's the memories we have, the nostalgia we have, the ability when it comes to collecting something from a movie to take a piece of that movie home with you, to help relive it. In the case of the Star Wars, the toys, the action figures, and the vehicles, it was the ability to recreate scenes from the movie, make your own scenarios, have Luke and Han fighting over the hand of Princess Leia, although that turned out to be not such a good idea when we found out what we found out a little later in the saga. But it's that wanting to build the collection, wanting to put things together, adding to the collection. It just gives you a real good feeling in that part of the brain that has the endorphins and makes you feel good.
Absolutely.
Now, I got to ask, are you a leave the toy in the box or take the toy out of the box as it should be to play with it?
Well, it's all according. When it comes to action figures, I try to get two of each, and so I have a set of off the card action figures and on the card action figures. So I have a complete display of all the original action figures on their original cards. But my first 12 figures, I opened them up and I just did all sorts of dioramas with them and played with them and put the clay underneath their feet and just had them stand on the shelves. And but then I went back and I rebought the first 12 figures. But I did it fairly early on because I can still remember driving to the store, and I had asked the owner, who was one of the early Star Wars dealers when people were not really paying much attention to actually people buying Star Wars things that were, everybody would say, well, they're still in the store. Why would you buy something from a dealer? What is a dealer doing with Star Wars stuff? But he put together, at my request, a full set of the first 12 figures on the cards, and I think it cost me something like some outrageous figure, like $185 for the first 12 original figures, mint on the cards.
Wow.
And that was an outrageous figure. And then I was leaving the store, and he said, "Oh, I've got something else that might interest you." And from under the counter, he pulls out a mint carded vinyl caped Jawa. And I said, "What's that? Did some fan make that or something like that?" And he said, "No, this is real. This is." I said, "Well, it's sort of ugly. They're much nicer looking with the cloth cape." I said, "What do you want for it?" And he said, "Well, I have to get $40 for it." And I said, $40? Are you kidding me? I just gave you 185 for all 12 figures, and you want 4? I said, "I'll pass, thanks." And I didn't have much cash left, and he only took cash. So I went out to my car and didn't have much gas in the car and needed to drive a half hour to get home. And I start to put the key in the door lock, and something stopped me and said to me, "Stupid, you might not get another chance." And I went back in, bought it, and I just about made it home as the gas gauge was approaching zero. But I got my vinyl cape Jawa on the card, which I still have for
Wow.
$40.
Holy smokes. What an awesome story.
From that, I learned, rarely pass something up that you think you can get cheaper or slightly better condition, because the odds are it's going to be a long time, if ever, that something is going to come up to you again.
That's the one thing that I learned as well, while collecting things. It's and there's also something too about our brains. There's something that's kind of like calling to you, and there are there have been many times where I pass on something, and then later on I come back and I'm like, I should not have passed on that, and it just weighs heavy on you as a collector.
Yeah, the second time that happened to me, it was also with an action figure, and I almost passed on a mint on the card Canadian yak face with a coin.
Mm.
And that was $110, which would have been the most I had ever paid for an action figure. And so this obviously was like in 1984 or something like that. And I hesitated and then remembered buying the vinyl Cape Jawa, and I said, what the hell? And I have never seen another one at the show.
And isn't yak face one of the most valuable toys there is?
Well, yak face, I mean, now there are plenty of yak faces around because they were distributed in Europe and Southeast Asia, but they were never sold in the United States. And so yak face was probably going to be a send away, but the line sort of petered out and sales were going down. And so it was never distributed in the US. So I started buying yak faces from a German dealer who was selling them, who would get them in the stores, and he was getting them cheap enough that I could buy them from him for $4 each. So yes, they're pretty, as opposed to all the other action figures, it's a fairly rare action figure. Not like a rocket firing Boba Fett, but
right.
Yeah, and then we've got a question about that later on in our segment called Sentry Mode. But I wanted to ask you, you talked about some of these overseas action figures, and there's some chat in the chat. There's some talk in the chat about a certain action figure. There have been some strange official Star Wars items, like the C-3PO tape dispenser, which is kind of weird looking. We talk about some of the more outrageous, strange, and unofficial or bootleg items. Do you also collect those? And I'm talking about somebody in the chat basically said the Uze Stormtrooper, or the ones from Russia with the calculators on there.
well, they're actually from Turkey.
Okay.
The Uze, there are bootlegs from Russia, and they're unpainted, and the bubble is stapled on. The Uze figures from Turkey were the Stars War figures.
That's right. Yeah.
So and they had wonderful photo illustrations on the cards. There's one of the I think it's not the TIE fighter pilot, but the
Imperial Guard.
The Imperial Guard and he's at the controls of what's supposed to be the Death Star laser cannon, and it's actually a Casio calculator.
Right.
So, but those figures are fairly unique, and the really rare one is called Headman, which is a Royal Guard with a silver helmet. And that is a very difficult figure to find, and especially on a card. There are only a few of those are known to exist.
So what's the story with those? Obviously they're bootlegs, but are collectors really wanting them, or is the price being driven because of that?
Yeah, the bootlegs are pretty steep. I've got another story for you. You're bringing back all sorts of memories. There were dealer friends of mine, and this is probably in the late 80s. And I went to a toy show and a comic show, and there was very little Star Wars stuff to be had there. But I went over to their table, and they had what looked like a 10-pack of figures, clearly bootleg, from Hungary. And again, with the staples on the cards and staples on the plastic bubbles. And I tried to get them down in price. It was $125 for this display in the 80s. And couldn't get them to budge, not even $5 on the thing. And I eventually, once again, went back to the table, and I decided to buy them. Things have escaped me, too. So I'm not always the smartest one when it comes to that, but I went back and bought that, and this has now been identified as one of 3 known store window displays of these action figures, and it has like big bubbles across all of the packages, just one big bubble on the top and one big bubble on the plastic on the bottom. And a few years after I bought it, somebody offered me $5,000 for it. So
Wow.
I didn't sell it, but that was a pretty good estimation of that the $125 was probably worth it.
Wow. That's amazing.
So, so when did you notice that your collection really started to grow past what a normal collector would have? Was it while the original trilogy was still going on, or was it after that?
Well, there were a couple of occasions like that. There was one when The Empire Strikes Back came out, and I realized that there were a number of things that I was missing as far as like I didn't have the large 12-inch Obi Wan Kenobi figure, and some of the smaller action figures on the Star Wars cards. And so I would go into toy shops looking to try to fill in the Star Wars collection while I was buying the Empire Strikes Back stuff new. And so I think I loved the Empire Strikes Back so much that it really solidified the fact that this was becoming a major part of my collection, because I was also buying at the time, as I had mentioned, the old rockets and robots from the 50s and 60s and early 70s. And so I had this generic space toy collection as well as a Star Wars collection, which was part of that. But I was also buying things like E.T. and Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and Major Matt Mason and all these very cool toys. It was later in the mid 80s to the late 80s when there really were very few Star Wars toys or objects that were new and around. This was sort of the dark period of Star Wars collecting. And a couple of major collectors were selling off their collections, some of them because they were getting divorced and they had to monetize the collection in order to split the assets of the couple. And I bought some really large chunks of three major collections, and one of which added hundreds of posters, early posters, to my collection, and another of which added a lot of foreign objects. And so it was at that point, around 87, 88, that I really decided that Star Wars was becoming the really important part of the collection. And by the 90s, I started selling off some of the other stuff to pay for Star Wars merchandise.
Wow. Interesting. So, I always tell this story, and as far as collecting, it's one of those things you're talking about how we don't really want to pass things up because we'll be sorry later. And I've got a quick little story, and I was wondering, what have you ever done that goes kind of like far beyond, I guess, reason in order to obtain a piece of collectible? I own.
I've got a good one too.
Yeah. I run a video production company. I've run it with a college buddy of mine since the early 90s. And I think on Craigslist, I saw that somebody was getting rid of an AT-AT. It was, I can't remember, it's right behind me, but it's oh, here it is. That one right there.
Yep.
So it was in a suburb like an hour away from Chicago. I contacted this person. I said, I'm going to go get it in the morning. I'll be there at like 9 a.m. sharp, ready to go. I got money. Let's do this. And I start making my way over there, leave the city early because obviously it takes you forever to get out of the city before you get into the suburbs. Halfway there, a client calls me and says, I'm at the office. Where are you? And I totally forgot that I set up a voiceover session with this client. Unfortunately I had to make something up, but there was no way that I was not going to get this AT-AT. I got there. Unfortunately, I did lose the client, but there she is. There she is, beautiful as ever. Have you?
What's one?
What was that?
What's one client?
Exactly, exactly. I got the ad at forever. The clients come and go. But do you have any stories like that? What is the craziest thing you've ever done for a collectible?
I brought a second mortgage on my house.
You won.
Yeah.
Well, this was an opportunity that I knew that if I had passed up, I would regret for the rest of my life. And it was a chance to buy some things directly from Gary Kurtz, the
Oh,
Oh, nice.
producer of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. And Gary had a bunch of models, some of which were screen used and some of which were made for him by the model shop at ILM and were exactly like the ones that were used in the making of Star Wars. He was in charge of, he made a lot of stuff like that as gifts for some of the major vendors and for some of the people at the movie studios and things like that. And Gary ended up moving to England, and he still had a lot of stuff in a storage locker in Los Angeles where I was living at the time. And so I heard through a third party that this was happening and got in touch with somebody who was actually representing Gary. It turned out to be the guy, Craig Miller, who was the first head of the official Star Wars fan club for Lucasfilm. And Craig and I have since become good friends. And I went over to Craig's house. He had all the stuff out of the locker, and there were all of these models. And I mean, it was just like, oh my God, I was really nervous. And he told me about what the price was on these things. I think there were 13 different pieces. And I went home and I thought about it. And I called him the next day and I said, well, Craig, I'm interested. And he said, well, which one do you want? And I said, all of them. And that's when I literally got a second mortgage on the house and used some of that money to buy the Kurtz collection,
Wow, that's
which he
amazing.
had. He had a lot more stuff, but
Yeah,
back in England. Um, but that was a one-time opportunity, and that's the kind of thing
absolutely.
that you kick yourself if, for instance, if you had passed up that ad. Um,
I would
you know,
definitely be kicking myself. It's a beautiful piece. And it didn't come with packaging, so I'm not exactly sure. It's got some label on the bottom that I have to kind of look at, but it's a beautiful piece, very
hey,
nicely detailed and weathered.
Ro,
yeah.
you should let me go first. Like, how can I compare with Gary Kurtz? I mean, like, so mine involves Burger King, and now I'm supposed to go after Gary Kurtz. Like, that ain't right. When Revenge of the Sith came out, 2005, I was on my first submarine, and Burger King was running their line of Happy Meal toys with really nice collectibles. I still have them upstairs, but I went out to sea at that time, right after Revenge of the Sith came out, but I tasked my wife with I need every single one of those collectibles
Of course.
from yeah, and I got notes from her. She God bless her. She got so sick of Burger King because she kept going and I guess either it wasn't a thing at that time or maybe they changed that you couldn't just buy the toys. You actually had to buy the meals. She's like, she was cursing me because she had eaten so much Burger King to try to get all these toys. But I think we ended up getting all of them. But again, it would have been a lot cooler had I gone before Gary Kurtz in the second mortgage.
The thing is that it was a collection and you wanted to get everything in it, and so you were passionate about it, and your wife helped you, so that's a great story.
Thank you.
So we have a quick question in the chat from some folks. Charlie Skywalker, one of our Red 5 network members, and it's also on the list. We were going to ask you, Steve, is there anything Star Wars related as far as collectible that doesn't exist that you wish did?
Well, I've always wanted a set of the holographic chess pieces from the cantina, and I've got a table, the chessboard table that my good friend Philip Wise in Texas made three of them or four of them, and it's a beautiful piece and has electronics in it, and then we got someone else to actually sculpt these things. But I always thought they'd make amazing toys and a diorama for a collector. You put it on just a round piece that looks like the top of the holographic chessboard, um, and you have your own Dejarik set. Um, and a company in Japan actually made two of the pieces, and then I guess they didn't sell. So it just tells you how much my idea is worth in the marketplace. But those are the only two pieces that were ever made. Two of the
Wow.
two of the 7 or 8 pieces.
Is there something now that exists that you're trying to get your hands on?
There's nothing out there right now that is a holy grail of mine. Um, I love the Baby Yoda stuff, the child, and I buy things that are quirky. I buy things that are unusual. I also buy all of the Hasbro toys, all the Lego items that I can find. So I keep those collections up pretty much. I've given up on some areas. I collect the comic books. So I when Dark Horse lost their contract and it switched to Marvel, so I think I have about 100 of the #1 covers from the revived Star Wars Marvel run, and so that was sort of fun tracking down through stores and eBay and my comic book dealer. Um, but there's nothing out there right now that I would say. I mean, there are props out there, but I'm not in a position. People think that I'm rich. I was a newspaper reporter and a writer all my life. I spent my money on Star Wars stuff, but I don't have a fortune. I never have. I come from working class parents and was a working stiff myself. So it's just that what I chose to spend my money on rather than vacations or things like that. It was Star Wars for the last 40 plus years.
That I feel that money well spent, obviously, for a lot of us, anyways. My wife keeps telling me, if you sold those things, we could have had a down payment on a house. I'm like, well, it'd be an empty house. I don't know how much that would be worth, but yeah, collecting is a lot of fun. And you mentioned the child and the Mandalorian. For a while there were no Star Wars collectibles. There was nothing. A lot of us call those the dark times for obvious reasons. But now that we've gotten a lot more Star Wars on the small screen through streaming and Disney Plus, you've got Clone Wars and cartoons and new comic books. There's a lot of new stuff coming out. The technology of creating the action figures from these, simple figures to even the Black Series or some of the other action figures has been phenomenal. The likeness of the characters has been unique, and the technology has advanced. Where do you see the world of collecting Star Wars heading towards if this continues? How do you see it changing? And I know you've been collecting for quite a while. You've seen a lot of this change. What other aspects of collecting do you kind of foresee coming?
Well, there's always the question of what technology can add to a product. I mean, they tried that with the ComTalk chip,
Right.
ComTech chips, and that was not the most exciting addition to the Star Wars line, because the #1, the ComTech technology at the time could not go inside the figure as they initially tried to do, and then they didn't use voices from the movies themselves. And so it was more disappointing than it was an addition to the action figures. Today, technology has come along quite a bit since 1999, and there are all kinds of things they could do. The question is, whether people want that and whether they will pay for that. When a 3 3/4 inch action figure sells for $12.97 as opposed to $1.99 or $2.99 back in the day, do you want to make it even more expensive? Or when you add the cost of electronics to a 6 inch series figure, I'm not sure you get that much more bang for your buck. Uncle Milton tried a bunch of electronic Star Wars toys, which I thought were pretty cool. The Jedi mind trick toys, where you actually use your brain to levitate some objects. But again, this was a middling seller. I mean, it sold okay, but it wasn't the kind of thing that it sold mass market tons of stuff. So I think it's Star Wars objects sell because of the story and the characters, and not because of added technology that wasn't part of the actual movie or TV show or comic or whatever it's based on.
And that's interesting too, because us as older fans, we I guess they're figuring out that we have more disposable income, so a lot of these better looking action figures are probably geared towards the adult collectors and not the 8 or 9 year olds that are out there discovering Star Wars for the first time. I know that whenever I see anything brand new that is original trilogy based, I'm like right there in line. I'll grab a couple, and because again, it kind of brings back those memories. But those toys nowadays are a lot better looking. They're just handsome. I mean, take a look at some of the Black Series Mandalorian figures. They're beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, they're
And
incredible.
some of the new technology that's going into these action figures, like the I forgot what it was called, the metal, the metal. I guess the coating on some of the action figures, especially in the Mandalorian, they're phenomenal. They're fantastic.
Then there's some of the really high-end collectibles for older collectors, like the Yadro, Lladro, the porcelain figures that women have collected for a long time, and now they've done a Star Wars line, and they've done the Queen Amidala was their first one, and it was about maybe 12 to 18 inches tall, and it was only $2,400. So
Put it on my Scarif card.
You're looking at a second mortgage for that.
how many action figures could you buy for that? Now they've just come out with a Princess Leia figure too. So it's a little beyond me right now.
Yeah, but I know Brad wants to ask you about the encyclopedia, but we have a friend of ours in the chat, Mr. Pete Fletzer, wanted to ask, what is your favorite action figure of all time?
You have to ask.
My favorite action figure of all time, I think, is the original Ben Kenobi figure, because I've based everything here at Rancho Obi Wan on the character Obi-Wan Kenobi, because he really talked to me. He was a mentor for Luke Skywalker, and got Luke to leave his comfortable existence and go on his journey of a lifetime. And in my personal and professional careers, I've been a mentor too. I've brought in people to the Wall Street Journal, to Lucasfilm, and have acted as a mentor towards them. And so Obi-Wan is a prime character as far as I'm concerned in Star Wars, and I still treasure that original Obi-Wan that I bought all those years ago.
Totally makes sense.
Then there's the rocket firing Boba Fett's, but that's another story.
So I wanted to ask you about that, because since you brought it up twice already, we had a little debate between another friend of mine who also works at NBC with me here in Chicago. The rocket firing Boba Fett, I'm thinking that I'm telling him we're kind of arguing back and forth. Was that ever released to the public? Yes or no?
No, not the original rocket firing Boba Fett. There was a product safety issue. And the story goes that Mattel had some Battlestar Galactica ships out there, and they had rockets about the size of the missile in the Boba Fett backpack, and it choked a young kid. And so the Product Safety Commission came up with the so-called choke tube. And if anything was smaller than the choke tube, you couldn't have it as part of a toy, even though you had the information on the action figure card that says ages 3 and up, ages 4 and up. You would still have problems with that. So they tried a couple of versions. They tried, the first version was the so-called L slot. So the firing mechanism came down and the tab went over in like a backward L. And then they were still developing the figure. And so the L slot figure is an all blue plastic figure with an 8-sided missile. And then they tried a J slot. So there was actually a tab that came down and then it went up a little. So it was a backward J. And that was a painted figure. And that was a 4-sided missile or rocket. And the problem with that is the rocket was still the same size and it still could have choked a kid. And so neither of those were ever produced. And what were sent out, although I think there is one example of a bagged rocket firing Boba Fett that I've heard about, but what was sent out was a sonic welded missile in the backpack and no firing mechanism, and with a note saying, sorry, but for product safety reasons, we're sending you this without the rocket firing feature. And if you're disappointed, we'd be happy to send this back, and we'd be happy to send you a different figure.
So Boba was much more dangerous as a toy than he was in the movie, is what we're saying here.
Nice.
Yeah,
Brad,
so
nice.
we definitely want to get into Rancho Obi Wan, but yeah, Ro promised me I could take a second to talk about one of my favorite collectibles, and we mentioned it right before the show, and that is the Star Wars Encyclopedia by Mr. Steve Sansweet. One of my, I think one of the first, I don't know, major reference material that I bought for Star Wars. I still love it. It's still my go-to reference. I'll check that. I'll flip right to a page. Canon, non-canon doesn't matter to me. The entries are just so in depth. So thank you for that reference first off.
That came out in 1998, and
yep.
It was one of the reasons that I decided to leave the Wall Street Journal and go to Lucasfilm. I was working on this book, and I wrote it myself. I had a couple of people help me by reading some of the books, but I had to read all of the books that had been written on Star Wars, all of the comics, all of the role-playing game books, and figure out basically all of the nouns, the people, places, weapons, ships, planets, you name it. And it was taking me a long time to put this together. I would go to work during the day, and at night I would go down to my office and my home office and work on the encyclopedia, but it was just dragging on forever. Lucasfilm called and said, we've got this job. We wonder whether you know somebody you might be able to recommend for it. It's a 1-year only job, guaranteed 1 year only. And it's to go out and talk to fans around the country, and maybe you go to 8 or 10 or 12 conventions and talk about the special editions of Star Wars. I had been bureau chief at the Wall Street Journal in LA for 9 years, and it was time at the Journal to do something else or to leave the Journal and go somewhere else. And I decided that if I had this job at Lucasfilm, it meant, number one, I could stay in my house in Los Angeles, go out on a Friday, go to a weekend convention, come back on a Sunday or a Monday, and be able to work on the encyclopedia during the week. And so I did that. I took the job, and they just forgot to get rid of me after a year, and I stayed there for 15.
And how long did that end up taking you from start to finish?
The encyclopedia took about a year of writing.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was working 3, 4, sometimes 5 days a week on it. It was writing and reading all of the source material.
And you can get stuck in a rabbit hole in that encyclopedia too, because each
Oh, yeah.
entry is cross-referenced with the other entries, so you can just keep on digging. You got the whole Jedi archives right there in one book.
Well, the second encyclopedia, which came out in 2008, is 3 volumes, so it's about 3 times the size. And I had a cadre of 7 other writers and editors working on it with me. But then I wrote through the whole thing so it would read as if it was written by one hand. And in fact, it was, but that's because I wrote through it. But Pablo Hidalgo, Bob Vitas, who was a fan who had done his own online Star Wars encyclopedia, which was an amazing job, was essential to putting together this bigger book. I don't know that there will ever be another Star Wars encyclopedia quite like that.
Well,
Agreed.
it seems like, obviously with more material coming out, sooner rather than later, it's got to be a very difficult task now to kind of put everything that has been used, in book form and try to keep track of it. What a monumental task to begin with.
Well, when you see the size of the Rancho Obi Wan library, which is a Star Wars books only or Star Wars related books only, you'll understand why it's like a near impossible task. And Lucasfilm and under Disney has been putting out a lot more in the way of kids books and young adult novels and so much stuff.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, obviously we want to give you an opportunity to talk to a little bit about Rancho Obi Wan and what has been going on. Obviously, as I mentioned before we got started, the pandemic and the situation with everything that's going on in the world has really put a wrench into things. People aren't going to the movies, people aren't going to museums and things like that, and that's hurting a lot of people. But why don't you tell people that are watching now and people in the chat what is going on with this wonderful institution of yours and what folks can do to help out. I'm going to put you full screen for a second so we can kind of, hear what you have to say.
Okay. Well, clearly we've had to close down tours since last March, and it looks like it's going to be the rest of the year at the earliest before we can resume tours. So we had an idea all along that we really rushed into completion, and now we have a Rancho Obi Wan virtual museum. You can look at it by going online to ranchoobiwan.org/VM or just ranchoobiwan.org and click onto virtual museum. And we've got a subscription series. So there are 5 levels of being able to subscribe to the Rancho Obi Wan Virtual Museum, and every week there's new content. There's video about the collection, specific collectibles. There's chats with me about my life and some war stories of working at the newspapers, writing books, working at Lucasfilm. There's peeks behind the scenes at events like celebrations or visit by Ralph McQuarrie to Rancho Obi Wan. We've got a database of more than 60,000 photos that we use, photos of collectibles and photos of events. We're going to do things like go to places in Rancho Obi Wan that you really couldn't go on a tour, like some of the lofts, places that I haven't visited for like the last 10 years and don't know what's up there. So we could find some zombies or Jedi. I'm not exactly sure what, but it's a way to sort of visit Rancho Obi Wan in the days when tours aren't possible or you live far away. This Saturday and Sunday, because we always do an exhibit at the Star Wars Celebration, and there would have been a celebration in Anaheim Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So Saturday and Sunday on the Rancho Obi Wan Facebook page, we're doing a Facebook Live visit to Rancho Obi Wan and looking at some of the items that we would have brought for our Empire Strikes Back 40th anniversary exhibit. So we'll see things like the prototype Boba Fett rifle that when George Lucas was first looking at the original Boba Fett costume, which was all white. This is the gun that the editor who was dressed in the suit was holding, and you see it in the photos and in some of the film footage of that early fitting, as well as a number of other items, both items that you could purchase and items that are one of a kind. But we also have a sale going on in the Rancho Obi Wan store, and we have something called Star Wars with Friends, which was a game that we've played at the last celebration, and it's a word game. You make up Star Wars words with Scrabble tiles, and we had a whole bunch of kits of swag that you could win by participating in this. And because the swag, a lot of it is dated 2020, we're selling large kits of these swags also at a reduced price on the Rancho Obi Wan store. So there's lots of stuff to look at on ranchoobiwan.org, the virtual museum, some of our blogs from the past, and the Rancho Obi Wan store. So it keeps us busy.
Awesome, awesome. And I know, when this pandemic is over, damn it, I've generated some interest in taking a nice little road trip down there to see you and all the wonderful things. We made friends with somebody that actually worked on The Mandalorian and The Rise of Skywalker. His name is Yoshi. He said that he sent you. I think this is what he sent you. He was able to create this helmet poster.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Yeah. Very nice piece.
Yeah, so he sent me a couple of those, and he asked me to hope that you remembered that he sent those over to you. But
yes.
It's one of those things that we would love to do a road trip to Rancho Obi Wan when all this comes to when it's over with and everybody can enjoy the company of Star Wars friends in person.
That's one of the big pluses for me of having Rancho Obi Wan is the ability to meet people from all over the world, fellow fans, and it's been great. We've had visitors here from Russia, Dubai, Finland, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, just all over the world. It's a real treat for me to share my passion of Star Wars collecting with people from all over the world. And what's also fun is sometimes we get spouses, and sometimes it's not always the woman. It can be the woman who's the collector and the husband who's just coming along, somewhat reluctantly. And usually, I've got to say, at the end of the tour, people who didn't know what to expect. And the tour can be 3 hours long because it's all about the stories behind the collectibles. And some of the stories like the ones that I've shared with you today, and how something was made, or how I got something, or how it fits into the saga. These people say, I really had fun here. So you never know who's going to become a Star Wars fan.
Did you ever have to forcibly remove anybody from there? Because I think
that would be me. You would have to forcibly remove me.
Yeah, some guy
named Jimmy Mack. We have to throw him out every time he comes here. Just a real royal pain.
I can't imagine. But Steve, I just want to thank you very much for joining us here. This has been a wonderful discussion. We are very grateful for your time. We want to end obviously with letting you know that you have a second home anytime you want to come down here and talk Star Wars collectibles with us at the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast. But we usually do a little Q&A segment that we call Sentry Mode, and it's something that Brad and I started. We started the podcast right after Star Wars Celebration in April last year, and have been having tons of fun talking to people just like yourself, meeting a lot of people all over the internet. I know I keep saying this, but my mother has always told me not to meet strange men on the internet, but that's how Brad and I met. So we share the love of Star Wars among other things, but we're gonna play a quick little segment before we leave called Sentry Mode. We've got 5 questions for you. They are Star Wars collectible related, and
Uh-oh.
I'm sure this is like throwing you softballs. So Brad, you want to take the first question? We'll alternate.
Sure. And just for the record, if Steve has different answers than what we have, we're going to take his answers as the correct ones, and we'll just say we were wrong in the answer
Exactly.
that we provided.
Exactly.
All right, Steve. First one. Name. See, this. I can't. Bro. Name the first company that had a licensing deal to create Star Wars action figures.
Kenner Products, a subsidiary of General Mills Fun Group.
Excellent. I think he's right, Brad.
I think he's right as well. Yeah.
All right, number 2, Sentry Mode. Name the action figure line that was released in the mid-90s that made most of our heroes look like they took too much steroids.
Power of the Force 2, or yes, Power of the Force 2.
That is correct.
And
I still have a lot of those.
And everybody had a jetpack for some reason.
Han Solo Flex.
Yeah. All right. What were the small toy vehicles that were marketed as being just outside the camera view of the movies?
Well, that's my good friend Mark Boudreau, who designed all of the mini rigs.
Excellent. Yeah.
And he did a wonderful job on those. They really do look like they were part of the movie, or should be someplace in the movie.
I love those stories, and watching the episode of The Toys That Made Us really brought back a lot, especially with those, and just hearing the story of how Lucasfilm and Kenner got together to bring so much joy to many children across the world. It's a fantastic story.
If it hadn't been Kenner, it wouldn't have been anybody, because they were the last resort, and they were just a middling size toy company. They were probably the 5th largest toy company in the U.S., and Lucasfilm and 20th Century Fox had gotten shut out of all the major toy makers. So somebody was very smart at the time.
Yeah, definitely. Question number 4. According to collectibles lore, what's the most expensive Star Wars action figure that exists? And I just wrote down 3 based on a quick quiz that I kind of researched before. But like Brad said, whatever you say is probably more right than anything.
Well, it's all according whether you count the couple of handfuls of rocket-firing Boba Fett's that are out there. That would be absolutely by far the most valuable. Some of those have gone for well over $100,000.
Wow. And then we
as far as more accessible ones, the vinyl cape Jawa on the card would be one of them. Yak Face would be up there, but definitely the rocket firing Fett.
And I know I see a lot of them on eBay that are reproductions, and I think I'm going to pick one up just to say at least I have a reproduction. But those are pretty good.
Yeah, they're done by a guy in Singapore.
Yeah.
All right, last question. Pretty sure we can go 5 for 5 here. On Kenner's X-Wing, how do you lock S-foils in attack position?
You press a little thingy in the back. Wait a second. It's been a long time since I've locked my X-foils in position.
Think carefully, Steve.
Hey, Ro, what was your source for the answer? Do you have one for a source, or is this?
No, I have an X-wing.
You have that one? You have Kenner's?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the answer?
The R2-D2 head on the back. When you push it down,
Yes, I forgot.
locks up.
Yep. You're right.
Woohoo!
Okay, 4 for 5.
No, he forgot, but he knew it at one
But,
point, so we're
yeah.
giving him 5 for 5.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how we
There's
get him
no
to come
way.
back.
Excellent. Awesome, Steve. Well, again, I hope you had fun discussing Star Wars collectibles with us as much as we had fun with you. Any last thoughts on, like I said, we'd love to definitely plan a trip to go out and see you guys. I can't imagine walking into, from the sizzle reel. I just can't imagine. And I know, my wife tells me that I have a lot of Star Wars toys, but after I showed her this sizzle reel, I told her to keep it in perspective.
That's right. Well, that's why I've saved many marriages and relationships by having a couple come here and seeing it and having one of the spouses say to the other, "Honey, just as long as you never get this crazy, I guess I'm okay with it." So I can save marriages and relationships. That's part of the joy of visiting Rancho Obi Wan. And as I said, these days you can visit the virtual Rancho Obi Wan by going to ranchoobiwan.org. And these days we can use all the help and all the visitors that we can get.
Absolutely. And we will definitely do our part to spread the word, Steve. And thank you so much again. Brad,
My
any
pleasure,
final thoughts?
Ro and Brad. It's good to meet you virtually. And you guys take care and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You do the same. Can I ask a favor? Can you just say your name? And we usually sign off with a little catchphrase that we've developed for our podcast. We say, "That's the scuttlebutt."
So you want me to say that?
Say, if you can say your name, say, I'm Steve Sansweet, and that's the scuttlebutt. It would be awesome.
This is Steve Sansweet, and that's the scuttlebutt.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was amazing. We love it. Thank you, guys, everybody in the
That's going to
chat.
be my ringtone. That's going to be my ringtone. Yeah, send that to me, Will.
Awesome. We'll see you, everybody in the chat. I'm going to end the broadcast. May the force be with you.
And with you.